October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel. Hours later, at 2 a.m. in the morning, Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations backed by Iran attacked Israel in support of Hamas. Let's be clear. Israel did not launch this war. The Lebanese people did not seek that war either, nor did the United States. Over the past year, including the days immediately following October the 7th, I directed the U.S. military to flow assets and capabilities into the region, including aircraft carriers, fighter squadrons, and sophisticated air defense battery to defend Israel and deter our common enemy at critical moments. Since the war with Hezbollah began, over 70,000 Israelis have been forced to live as refugees in their own country, helplessly watching their homes, their businesses, their communities as they're bombarded and destroyed. And over 300,000 Lebanese people have also been forced to live as refugees in their own country. In a war imposed on them by Hezbollah. All told, this has been the deadliest conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in decades. How many of Hezbollah's senior leaders are dead, including its longtime leader, Nasrallah? And Israel has destroyed Hezbollah's terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon as well, including miles of sophisticated tunnels, which were prepared for an October 7-style terrorist attack in northern Israel. But lasting security for the people of Israel and Lebanon cannot be achieved only on the battlefield. And that's why I directed my team to work with the governments of Israel and Lebanon to forge a ceasefire, to bring a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to a close. Under the deal reached today, effective at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, the fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. What is left of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations will not be allowed, well, I emphasize, will not be allowed to threaten the security of Israel again. Over the next 60 days, the Lebanese army and state security forces will deploy and take control of their own territory once again. Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon will not be allowed to be rebuilt. And over the next 60 days, Israel will gradually withdraw its remaining forces. And civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities and begin to rebuild their homes, their schools, their farms, their businesses, and their very lives. We're determined this conflict will not be just another cycle of violence. And so the United States, with the full support of France and our other allies, has pledged to work with Israel and Lebanon to ensure that this arrangement is fully implemented, the agreement totally implemented. You know, there will be no U.S. troops deployed in southern Lebanon. This is consistent with my commitment to the American people to not put U.S. troops in combat in this conflict. Instead, we, along with France and others, will provide the necessary assistance to make sure this deal is implemented fully and effectively. Let me be clear. If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense consistent with international law, just like any country when facing a terrorist group pledged to that country's destruction. At the same time, this deal supports Lebanon's sovereignty, and so it heralds a new start for Lebanon, a country that I've seen most of over the years, a country with rich history and culture. If fully implemented, this deal can put Lebanon on a path toward a future that's worthy of its significant past. And just as the Lebanese people deserve a future of security and prosperity, so do the people of Gaza. They too deserve an end to the fighting and displacement. The people of Gaza have been through hell. Their world's absolutely shattered. Far too many civilians in Gaza have suffered, far too much. And Hamas has refused for months and months to negotiate a good faith ceasefire and a hostage deal. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold. In the process, bring an end to the fighting, which would make possible a surge of humanitarian relief. Over the coming days, the United States will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and others to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. With the hostages released and the end of the war without Hamas in power, that becomes possible. As for the broader Middle East region, today's announcement brings us closer to realizing the affirmative agenda that I've been pushing forward during my entire presidency. A vision for the future of the Middle East where it's at peace and prosperous and integrated across borders. A future where Palestinians have a state of their own, one that fulfills its people's legitimate aspirations, one that cannot threaten Israel or harbor terrorist groups with backing from Iran. A future where Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal measures of security, prosperity, and yes, dignity. To that end, the United States remains prepared to conclude a set of historic deals with Saudi Arabia, to include a security pact and economic assurances, together with a credible pathway for establishing a Palestinian state and the full normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, a desire they both have. I believe this agenda remains possible, and in my remaining time in office, I'll work tirelessly to advance this vision for an integrated, secure, and prosperous region, all of which strengthens America's national security. Getting all this done will require making some hard choices. Israel has been bold on the battlefield. Iran and its proxies have paid a very heavy price. Now Israel must be bold in turning tactical gains against Iran and its proxies into a coherent strategy that secures Israel's long-term safety and advances a broader peace and prosperity in the region. Today's announcement is a critical step in advancing that vision. And so I applaud the crazy decision made by the leaders of Lebanon and Israel to end the violence. It reminds us that peace is possible. Say that again, peace is possible. As long as that is the case, I will not for a single moment stop working to achieve it. God bless you all, and sorry to keep you waiting so long. May God protect our troops. Thank you.
Get a ceasefire in Gaza before leaving office?
Ask me how I get a ceasefire, and I think so. Hold it. Pray.
How is this push any different from the previous ones?
Noticing that. Should be reported. What?
Mr. President, what have you told the new administration?
So President Biden taking some questions there at the end, very difficult to hear his responses about the potential for a ceasefire in Gaza. But the big news that he announced there in the Rose Garden today was that a long-sought ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon has now been reached with the help of U.S. negotiators, potentially ending the deadliest conflict between Hezbollah and Israel in decades after more than a year of fighting. The president said the fighting will end tomorrow morning. He said that the ceasefire will last 60 days and that Israel will use that time to withdraw its forces from southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, he said, will not be allowed to rebuild there. And he noted that the ceasefire does not apply to the ongoing conflict in Gaza with Hamas. Let's bring in Face the Nation moderator and Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. Margaret, this was a ceasefire that was months, if not a year, in the making. What was the key to finally getting it done?
The timing was right for the Israeli prime minister, who, according to U.S. officials I've spoke with, assessed that he didn't want to keep Israeli troops in that 3 to 4 kilometer space of southern Lebanon for a long time and gain risk that comes with it. He also was under tremendous domestic political pressure at home. There are an estimated 70 to 80,000 Israelis who have been unable to return to their homes in the north of that country since October 8th and the beginning of those rocket attacks that started a year or so ago. There's also the very real-world assessment that the military gains that Israel has achieved in terms of dramatically weakening the leadership of Hezbollah, killing their leader, very strategic, powerful leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and also demonstrating how weak the state of Iran, Hezbollah is a proxy force of Iran. Iran's their chief sponsor, how weak the state of Iran has become. Iran had to agree to this. That shows quite a lot in terms of where we are with a dramatically weakened sponsor in Iran, a dramatically weakened proxy force with Hezbollah, and that's what led us to today. And it was President Biden's U.S. envoy, Amos Hochstein, who has been working this for months and months and finally got it over the line today.
What, if anything, does this deal mean for the long-stalled ceasefire that is being sought between Israel and Hamas in Gaza?
That is a much harder problem to solve. The trigger time at 4 a.m. Eastern or 4 a.m. local in Lebanon will silence those guns, but the guns will continue going in Gaza. More than 44,000 Palestinians estimated to have been killed, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. There is no immediate hope of a breakthrough there. The political calculus is also much more complicated for the Israeli prime minister as he assesses what to do next and may be waiting to see what President Trump may allow him to do, since they have a close relationship. The far-right government in Israel is putting a lot of pressure on Mr. Netanyahu to even potentially consider annexing Gaza, something that U.S. officials don't think he is likely to do at this point, but he has perhaps more leeway come January. So the short answer is not a lot happens on the ground in Gaza, but at least on paper, it looks like Hamas is more isolated since Hezbollah will be standing aside. And
we heard President Biden say there in the Rose Garden that the only hope for Hamas is to now release the remaining Israeli hostages. I want to go now to foreign correspondent Deborah Patta. She is in East Jerusalem. Deborah, let's just take a step back and talk to us about the scope of this conflict that you have reported on consistently over the past year. Why did it start, and how widespread is the devastation from the fighting that has continued right up until today?
Well, as we know, that this round of fighting, if you want, in the Middle East, I mean, this is a decades-long conflict, began with the October 7 attack by Hamas. The day after that, Hezbollah launched attacks on Israel in solidarity with Hamas. As Israel continued its war with Hamas, Hezbollah said that they would continue to strike Israel as well in solidarity. That has now been decoupled because there is no ceasefire in Gaza, and Hezbollah has now agreed to this particular ceasefire. The ceasefire deal has been approved by Israel's cabinet. 10 of its members voted for it, but significantly, one person voted against it, and that's Ben Gvir, who is a far-right member and an ally of Netanyahu. But Netanyahu had enough votes, so he was able to push this through. As Margaret was mentioning there, a deal in Gaza is going to be far, far more difficult. In fact, we spoke to an analyst today who said that they believe that Israel will be in Gaza for the foreseeable future. But Netanyahu went on national TV today, spoke about the gains that they have made over the past year. He says that Israel most significantly retains the right to strike back if Hezbollah violates the ceasefire and tries to rearm. That was a very, very important part of making this deal happen, and something that Israel is going to be very pleased about. But of course, the real test is going to be on the ground. It's been over a year of fighting. Hezbollah and Israel have been trading fire throughout that time, but in the past 2 months, it exploded into a full-out war. And we saw that pager attack, which these thousands of pagers exploded simultaneously, killing over 40 people and wounding over 3,000. And now the issue will be the displacement, trying to get people home in Lebanon and here in Israel back to the north.
And Deborah, declaring a ceasefire is one thing, upholding it is another. And these two nations will be tested early on as they work to implement the ceasefire. What are some early tripwires that they could cross?
Well, the implementation of this deal is going to be monitored by a five-nation committee, which includes the US and France. But remember that this particular deal is modeled on a very similar one in 2006, which ended that war between Israel and Lebanon. And that deal never held at all after that war lasted about a month long. And as has been pointed out, this is the deadliest war since the civil war ended in Lebanon in 1990. So upholding it is going to be a very, very difficult one. There is 60 days during which Israel will withdraw from Lebanon and Hezbollah will move back north of the Litani River. That's going to be a very fraught time. It doesn't look as if people will return to the north of Israel or to the south of Lebanon for any time soon, because they're going to be waiting to see whether or not this deal does indeed hold.
So many citizens displaced. Deborah Patta in East Jerusalem, thanks so much. Once again, President Biden just confirmed Israel and militant Hezbollah forces in Lebanon have agreed to a ceasefire deal. This full and permanent ceasefire would bring an end to more than a year of violence between the two countries. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington.
We have been listening to that special report following President Biden's remarks on a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah. President Biden said at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, fighting will end across their border. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities, he said. He also firmly said no U.S. troops will be sent to southern Lebanon. Biden insisted that if Hezbollah breaks this deal, he stands behind Israel defending itself. He also said the people of Gaza deserve an end to fighting and that Hamas has a choice to make, that the only way out is to release hostages. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now from the Pentagon. Charlie, I'm going to reiterate, the president said this is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. What does that depend on?
Yeah, well, it depends on Hezbollah adhering to that, because Israel has made very clear, Prime Minister Netanyahu made very clear that if Hezbollah does not adhere to it, that they will respond forcefully. So really, I think what we're going to need to do is to look at as how this is implemented over the next few days. I think it was interesting that he mentioned that this is a sort of cause-effect, that this is an opportunity for Hamas to end the fighting there. Hamas has essentially been isolated now. Hezbollah has stopped the fighting. Israel has always referred to this as two separate conflicts, but Hezbollah has been in league with Hamas ever since a year ago, October, so they have been related. I mean, it's worth noting here, we may have forgotten, Hezbollah had originally said that they would never agree to a ceasefire until the fighting in fighting in Gaza was over. Well, they obviously dropped that demand. And as Margaret made clear moments ago, the fact that Iran had to sign off on this, you know, Iran is the benefactor of Hezbollah. That shows you the dynamics, the shifting dynamics. So I think what's going to be critical is what happens over the next, well, this immediate moment for 10 days when the Israeli forces start pulling back south of the Litani River. They already have that area conquered. They've moved there today. Hezbollah has been pushed out. And how quickly you can get the Lebanese armed forces to take over that territory. And again, as you heard President Biden say, this is going to have to be monitored by United States, France, other international operators in making sure that that ceasefire holds. But we're looking at a very critical 60-day period here.
Charlie, hang on for 1 second if you can, because I want to go to CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Patta in East Jerusalem. Deborah, you were speaking with Nancy about a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas being more complicated, potentially taking longer. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, we spoke to military experts today who believe that Israel is going to be in Gaza for the foreseeable future, that there is very little hope of a ceasefire there right now. The fact that Hamas and Hezbollah, the issues have been decoupled, doesn't really help the people of Gaza, who are still under immense pressure. They are being pounded every single day by Israel. There is desperate hunger in the region, and very little aid is trickling through. So the situation there is far more dire in many ways. It's always good news when there is peace. And so that is going to give people some kind of hope. But let's remember, there are 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, and there are still over 100 hostages, Israeli hostages, being held in Gaza. And for them, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope right now.
Deborah Patta, thank you so much. I want to go back to Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon. And Charlie, I apologize to you and our viewers. We're sort of bouncing around some ideas, but I want to pull at a thread that you had mentioned, and that is that Iran had to sign off. Is that indicative of maybe a weakened stance for Iran in this? What did they gain by agreeing to the ceasefire terms?
Yeah, I think Margaret put it clear. I think this underlines, I think this amplifies exactly where Iran is right now and where Hezbollah is. Remember, Israel had eradicated all of Hezbollah's top leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah. So they are spinning. They are on their heels, and they have been for a number of weeks and months. They are a credible force, and they have a huge arsenal. These are not on the scale of what we saw with Hamas in Gaza, the weaponry that Hezbollah has. So taking Hezbollah out of the equation, it would have to be at the behest of Iran. So I think this really underlines where Israel stands in its relationship with Iran and Hezbollah. You remember months ago when there was a retaliation, it came from Iran and it came from Hezbollah, the worst retaliation that Israel has seen in terms of the number of cruise missiles and drones, etc. Sometimes those were in partnership and coordinated. So now Hezbollah has been taken out, essentially. That threat, anyway, has been removed. Let's see how long that holds. But that would have been at the behest of Iran. And I think it speaks volumes of where Iran sits right now in terms of its influence over that region.
Charlie, one thing that the president said is that France and others will provide assistance to make sure this is implemented fully and effectively. What is their role?
Well, I'd like to know the details about that, because we've been asking here if there's going to be a role for the DOD. It's been hard to get that sort of official confirmation, but if I were to sort of speculate, France obviously has had sort of colonial vestigial influence in that region, and that's why they have been brought on board. It's part of the international coalition. But as far as the United States, I think what's key here is when you look at that Lebanese armed forces, the LAF, they simply don't have the equipment or the training or, in some cases, the stomach to do what they're going to need to do, which is to hold that territory, not necessarily against hostilities, but assurances to the Israeli government that that will be held by Lebanese forces, not Hezbollah, and they will continue to hold that area. So that's going to take an element of monitoring. It's going to take an element of training, might even take an element of arming. I'm not suggesting that's what's happening. But when we talk about international mediators like the United States, I mean, it's key that was announced from the White House, and it was key also that President Biden nodded to President Macron, saying that this is part of that. So I'm not exactly sure what the nuts and bolts of that means in terms of international monitoring to make sure that Hezbollah is not there, whether it's sort of bolstering the forces of the Lebanese armed forces. But that's what I would suspect that we'd see over the course of the next few weeks and months. They need training. They may need equipment. I'm not talking about lethal equipment, but the Lebanese armed forces, the way they stand now, if you've got 5,000 soldiers there, it will be a stretch to police that territory.
Charlie, hang on. I have one more question for you, but I do want to catch our viewers up to speed that we are discussing this after President Biden just announced that the U.S. helped secure a ceasefire deal in Lebanon, which would end fighting between Israel and Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah as of 4 a.m. local time tomorrow. Charlie, back to you. I want to ask you, that Biden wrapped his comments saying Israel has been bold on the battlefield. Israel must now be bold to establish a strategy to determine long-term safety and to advance broader peace in the region. Is that a message specifically directed at Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet?
Well, you know, we are at a transitional point. I think U.S. officials have made that clear. This is the defeat, as far as the Israelis are concerned, of Hezbollah. When it came to Hamas, it wasn't just the defeat, but the total destruction. And as my colleague Deborah pointed out, that is a big ask. You know, there's nobody suggesting that conflict is going to be resolved anytime soon. But there is an opportunity here because, quite frankly, the world is growing weary of that fight in Gaza, and tens of thousands of people killed there, the increasing humanitarian crisis. Now we will see that this one conflict has been put to the side. Maybe more focus will be on a sort of diplomatic solution to what's happening inside Gaza, and of course the release of those hostages, including American hostages, so bringing that to an end. By the way, it's worth noting here that the U.S. military posture has largely been, for the defense of Israel, has largely been an answer to the threat from Hezbollah and from Iran, not from Hamas. They didn't need warships and aircraft carriers and interceptors and destroyers to protect Israel against Hamas, against, you know, the rockets and mortars that Hamas is capable of firing. These are Hezbollah rockets that the U.S. has been there to defend against, and Iranian retaliation. So this will have an impact on U.S. military posture. As far as we know, there has not been a change to that U.S. military posture, but that was in reaction to the threat that Iran and Hezbollah posed to Israel itself.
Security correspondent Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much. I want to go ahead and bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who is at the White House. Scott, what did we learn from President Biden's remarks about this agreement?
Those are some pretty brief remarks, and it didn't really stop for questions after it, but we know the White House has made this a priority over the past few days, weeks, and months. In fact, President Biden had a call with the French president on Friday to talk about these negotiations, which the White House has credited the French with being part of. President-elect Trump has taken some credit for this accord through a campaign transition spokesperson saying that Hezbollah heard the clock ticking towards the Trump administration, and it may have been leveraged to get this deal past the finish line. But no matter who gets credit, this is happening at a distinctively sensitive moment in the transition between one administration to another through the peaceful transfer of power. And in fact, the Secretary of State earlier today confirmed that he's having or will engage again with Marco Rubio, the Florida senator who is the designee of Donald Trump to be his nominee for next Secretary of State. No matter what state this peace process is in, it's being handed over from one administration to the next on January 20th. And clearly both sides at this point, Lindsay, are mindful of that.
Scott, what does it mean that the president was able to get this done before he leaves office?
It's certainly something he's been pushing toward. It's something he can carry as part of his legacy. But also, there is the tenuousness of this 60-day window between the ceasefire and the completion of the movement of troops. This is a 2-month process, and the administration has been clear about that. It's going to take some time to get people on the ground and people off the ground in the war zone areas. And the administration has said through their briefings with us over recent months that this is only complete once people in Israel feel secure and safe moving back to the northern regions of the country, close to that border again. So it's a process as much as it's an accomplishment, though it's one the administration is able to secure before its final days here.
Scott, hang out with us if you can. I want to bring in retired Marine Colonel Mark Cancian now. He's a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for being with us. What do you believe this means for the Middle East at large?
Well, certainly it's a step in the right direction. The violence will be going down instead of up, as it's been going for the last year. So that's good. We've heard a lot, though, about just how fragile this agreement is. It's being enforced by very weak forces. The Lebanese armed forces and the UN forces in the area are unwilling to stand up to Hezbollah. There was an agreement very much like this back in the 2000s. It collapsed very quickly. There's a commission that's going to overlook this with the United States and France, but they have no troops on the ground. Ultimately, it will be up to Hezbollah, and they may decide to hold on and to stay above the Litani River until they rebuild their strength, but they may start pushing south, and then the Israelis have made it clear that they'll go back in. But this takes out one of the maybe three ongoing conflicts. Of course, there's Iran, which has been weakened, and then there's Hamas down in Gaza, as we've heard. That continues with really, unfortunately, no end in sight.
Mark, the president said this is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities, but we know it's going to take place over 60 days. That would put us in a new Trump administration. Is that significant?
It is significant in that we'll have a whole new team in the United States that will be involved with this. But there's nothing in this agreement that contravenes the kinds of things that the Trump administration has said, that the prospective administration, they're very supportive of Israel. Netanyahu has been supportive of this agreement, so a Trump administration will likely go along with that. They also made a nod towards Saudi Arabia and bringing those Abraham Accords along. That was a major diplomatic triumph for the first Trump administration. I think you'll see that continue also.
Mark Cancian, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Let's go back to CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane at the White House. Scott, I don't know if you could hear. I know that the president was asked a couple of questions as he was walking away from the podium. Did you hear the questions? Did you hear his answers?
Oh, we certainly heard the questions, those of us who were near the yelling. The answers were a little harder to detect. The questions were, what about Gaza now? With this ceasefire seemingly in hand or near the finish line, what becomes of Gaza? And the readout we could get on his response was something about, I pray it happens, or we're working towards making it happen. We know that he spoke during his remarks about how he's going to use the balance of his time, the remaining days of this administration, towards trying to secure more peace in the Middle East, in that region of the world, he said. So this is a limited time remaining in the administration, but this is also a pivotal time for efforts and negotiations toward peace. We also know that during this transition, the Trump administration has one thing cleared off their plates when they get here, one pressing matter in the Middle East that's being reduced or eliminated, but there are certainly efforts that are going to need to be ongoing to deal with Gaza.
Scott, what were your other takeaways from some of his remarks? I mean, he mentioned Gaza several times, that the people of Gaza also deserve to see an end to fighting, made it clear that Israel must now be bold in establishing strategy to determine long-term safety and advance broader peace in the region, seemingly to push this forward to get an end to hostilities in the region altogether.
Yeah, there's this drumbeat over the past 24 hours, first from the Secretary of State, then from the president just now in the Rose Garden, about the magnitude of the death in the Middle East. These are measured in thousands in Lebanon, tens of thousands in Gaza, and it added the imperative of getting this wrapped up efficiently, promptly. And no surprise, Lindsay, the statements of support coming in now from the president's allies in Congress. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who is the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, celebrating the agreement. Joe Courtney, who deals with foreign affairs, a congressman from Connecticut, celebrating this agreement. We expect more of that to come. This is one of those issues that is somewhat transcendent politically. There will be celebrations of any ceasefire agreement. And Trump's campaign has said that they argue Trump deserves credit for this because he's coming and has leveraged his victory perhaps to speed these talks along, but that these negotiations have seemed to have borne fruit.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what we're hearing from Trump's team?
Yeah, and I want to get the statement just right because this comes from a campaign spokesperson, not from Donald Trump himself. But they issued a statement to CBS News and to others today talking a bit about the impact Trump may have had, saying that Hezbollah and the other proxies of Iran in the Middle East, quote, heard the clock ticking as President Trump will soon return to the White House. That's really symmetrical, isn't it, to the credit Trump would take earlier this year on good days on the stock market, that the economy was getting boosted because he was certain to win the election and they knew his administration was coming. The stock market jumped on November 6th, the day after the election, took credit for that as well. And this is one of those matters I think that he's going to try to triumphantly declare victory on. But that's another takeaway from what President Biden was saying, not so much triumphantly declaring victory of his own, but a victory for the people in the Middle East.
Scott, if you can hang on, thank you so much for all of that reporting. I want to bring back Charlie D'Agata, our senior national security correspondent at the Pentagon. Charlie, because people may just be joining us, can you please reestablish the conditions of the ceasefire deal and what will happen between day 10 and day 60?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, the ceasefire takes hold in about 5 hours, a little less than 5 hours, so 4 a.m. local time. There's still fighting going on. In fact, some of the heaviest bombardment that Lebanon has seen in the past few days is they're trying to, take out as many Hezbollah targets, suspected Hezbollah targets as they can. Hezbollah has been firing rockets back into Israel. So what we're going to see over the course of the next 10 days is the beginning of the withdrawal of Israeli forces who are in that area in southern Lebanon, about 20 miles north up to the Litani River. That's a key river, key geographical point. And over the course of the next 60 days is how much time they're given for Israeli forces to pull out of that area, entirely out of that area, and it will be taken over by Lebanese armed forces and UNIFIL, the UN Lebanese group that's already there. That hasn't been very effective, and they too have come under fire. That's been a point of controversy. So in that time, 60 days, all Israeli forces will have pulled back. It will be filled by Lebanese forces, Lebanese armed forces, not Hezbollah. Hezbollah will be restrained to the north of the Litani River. So that creates essentially a 20-mile or so buffer zone between Hezbollah, for what's left of Hezbollah, and the border with Israel. And that will be an opportunity for about 60,000 Israeli residents to return to the north, tens of thousands of displaced Lebanese to return to the south, and that's where we stand. But kind of what's critical here is if we fast forward the calendar, 60 days, that is a few days into the Trump administration. So, it's at a critical time. It's at a critical time how it's unfolding and whether or not Hezbollah will adhere to it. If they don't, Prime Minister Netanyahu has already said they will be met with force.
Charlie, what do we know about how the ceasefire deal is being received among Netanyahu's war cabinet?
As in any case, there are divisions. This wasn't an anonymous decision by any stretch. There are some that feel that Netanyahu and the Israeli and the IDF, for that matter, should have gone further. The job isn't done. The Israelis had made clear that they want to not just defeat Hamas in Gaza, but to destroy them. That isn't the case with Hezbollah, but they've taken out all the meaningful leadership. So there is some dissent, feeling that this job isn't done yet. But, it passed. And I think when you listen to Netanyahu's remarks, when he continues to double down on the fact that he repeated it, this will be met forcefully, because we've seen these fragile ceasefires collapse, and they sometimes collapse spectacularly. It takes nothing for Hezbollah to fire rockets or to, create an incursion into that area. So I think that's why Prime Minister Netanyahu has doubled down on the fact that if there is any kind of infraction, that the Israelis reserve the right. I mean, that's part of the wording of the ceasefire deal, to respond with force, to reassure the people of Israel and the people that are reluctant, who are tired of the fighting that's happening, tired of having to take shelter from Hezbollah missiles, that this guarantee is an ironclad guarantee for as much as any of these guarantees can be in that region.
On that note, Charlie, since the war with Hezbollah began, more than 70,000 Israelis have been forced to live as refugees in their own countries, according to the president, and more than 300,000 Lebanese people have been forced from their homes. What homes are those Lebanese people going to come back to?
Well, that's a good question. You've seen the level of destruction in those areas. I mean, they've taken down whole buildings, whole neighborhoods, whole apartment blocks. There is going to be a lot of reconstruction that's going to take place. We understand that the United States will be part of that reconstruction. I think that's part of the deal, that they're going to help reconstitute those parts of southern Lebanon. And yes, I think we also have to make note, not just the tens of thousands of people have been displaced, but something like 3,800 people have been killed in that conflict alone. And that's worth noting. There's a tremendous amount of damage, even as far north as Beirut. So as you get further south, as I said, south of the Litani River, they have just been hammering suspected Hezbollah holdouts and headquarters and command and control. And a lot of that, they've used some of their biggest explosives because they wanted to take out the tunneling system, similar to the tunneling system that you saw in Gaza with Hamas. Hezbollah has had, anyway, a very sophisticated and deep tunneling system. So, yeah, you've seen the images, you've seen the pictures. Some of those neighborhoods have just been erased.
All right, CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland and CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie Daggett. Thank you to both of you. We're going to stay on top of the developments in the Middle East and bring you updates as we get them. For now, we're going to take a break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will. You go, gal. That's right.
Let me see if you can find me.
I want to make sure that my voice is heard, but also that I lift up other voices.
You can't write a better script.
Yeah, boy. It's gonna be a ride.
We'll see you 7 o'clock sharp.
How fast do you think you were going? 195 miles an hour. This is incredible.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
Is this brain surgery without a knife?
It is.
What risk do these children pose to Russia?
I'm not sure the world is prepared for this change.
Definitely not.
Who's the best coach in college football today?
Let me see a mirror.
It's time for the CBS News original, 60 Minutes. Sundays on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
I'm a voracious consumer of information and constantly curious. I want to know the basic facts of every issue and to press into the heart of the matter. Information is the currency of democracy, and that's what we bring to the table every Sunday.
When you need your sports news all the time,
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap,
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone,
This could happen to anybody.
and sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An investigation by a Senate subcommittee into so-called junk fees that airlines charge has revealed just how profitable they are. The report released today says in part, quote, airlines have generated billions of dollars in revenue from ancillary fees, while travelers confront more and increasingly complex fees and fewer options for avoiding them. The Democrat-led Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation says it looked into 3 major airlines, American, Delta, and United, and 2 low-cost airlines, Frontier and Spirit. The report says Frontier and Spirit pay gate agents to enforce its bag policy. Frontier calls it an incentive program. They also say it ensures passengers are treated fairly. And Spirit disagrees with several statements in the report. Lawmakers also found airlines are using algorithms more frequently to determine fees and find ways to target pricing based on a customer's information. And ever pay more for where you sit on the plane? Well, the report says these 5 airlines are making more money than ever on seat fees. Democrats on the subcommittee want the Department of Transportation and the Department of Treasury to investigate the airline's business practices. The Biden administration is proposing a new rule that would give millions of Americans with obesity access to weight loss drugs. Right now, Medicare only covers these drugs for people diagnosed with diabetes or cardiovascular disease who are obese or overweight. Some state programs cover the drugs, but if not, they can cost someone as much as $1,000 a month. Under the new rule, Medicare or Medicaid would cover these expensive medications like Ozempic and Wegovy. Doing this could cost taxpayers as much as $35 billion over the next decade. But President-elect Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., is an outspoken opponent of these drugs. So let's dive into all this. CBS News reporter Alexander Tin joins us now. Alexander, thanks for being here. What's the Biden administration's reasoning for proposing this change now, and how much of a game changer would this be?
Yeah, I mean, this would be a significant change, one that advocacy groups and lawmakers have been calling on the Biden administration to make. From the big picture, what the Biden administration says is that the reason they're doing this change now is because doctors' groups are increasingly recognizing obesity as a disease that should be treated as a disease, not just a symptom or a characteristic. And second, that the prevalence of obesity in this country is going up. Of course, that doesn't answer the more micro question of why at this point in the calendar year they're rolling out this proposal when everyone knows now that the proposal will be finalized by their successors, the Trump administration. We don't have a great answer for that, except from what officials have said today, which is we made this decision now because we made this decision now.
And it would be very expensive, so that certainly is a component to consider for the American taxpayer. But what can you tell us about the benefits of these drugs and really why we keep hearing so much more about them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there are the narrow set of benefits that first got the FDA's approval for these drugs, which is the significant ability not only to create weight loss, but sustain weight loss. Of course, what has been tacked on after that is all these additional indications, as doctors say, for all the different benefits that they could have for cardiovascular disease, for sleep apnea. We're increasingly hearing